The snow never stopped on the world of Karthos. It fell in soft, endless waves that buried even the tallest bones of the ancient forests. The sky was always gray, the air sharp and thin, biting through even the thickest fur. And in that frozen wasteland, a single human lived among beasts that were not her kind. Her name was Lieutenant Mara Ellis, survivor of the Dauntless expedition, the only human left after the crash. The rest of her crew had frozen or vanished weeks ago. She alone had made it to the alien outpost, where the creatures called Thurkay lived, tall, furred beings with yellow eyes and voices like rolling thunder. They had allowed her to stay. But not because they liked her. They allowed her because they wanted to watch the fragile creature struggle. The mockery begins. The campfires of the Thurkay burned blue in the night, fueled by minerals in the ice. Their tents were made from thick pelts stitched together with sinew, warm and heavy. Inside, their young cubs played, their laughter echoing across the frozen plain. And outside, in the wind and snow, Mara huddled beneath a torn survival blanket, thin, silver, barely large enough to cover her legs. The aliens had offered no shelter, no furs. One cub, not more than half her height, pointed a clawed finger at her. "Look, she sleeps under foil." The cub laughed. "Is that a blanket or trash from her ship?" The others joined in, growling and laughing in their deep alien tones. Mara didn't look at them. She simply pulled the blanket tighter, her jaw trembling. Her lips cracked from the cold. Her breath came out in clouds, white against the dark sky. Her boots were soaked through with ice. Her hands, pale and shaking, rubbed together in desperate rhythm. She said nothing, because she had no strength left to argue, but one of the older aliens, a warrior named Tharu, stepped closer. His fur was thick as armor, his fangs glinting in the firelight. "Human," he rumbled, his voice deep as a drum. "Why not make fire? Or do your kind fear the flame too?" Mara looked up at him slowly. Her eyes were dull, half-frozen, but behind them was something that didn't die. Something fierce. "No," she whispered. "We don't fear fire. We made it first." The aliens laughed harder. Tharu shook his head. "Then why do you shake under the stars?" Mara didn't reply. She turned her face away and closed her eyes. That night, while the Thurkay feasted on roasted meat and warm broth, she sat alone in the snow, pressing her knees to her chest, whispering to herself words no one understood. "Just one more night, Mara," she said softly. "Just one more." Survival in the cold. The wind screamed over the plains, carrying ice and dust. The temperature dropped below -60. Even the Thurkay retreated into their dens. Only Mara remained outside, wrapped in her thin blanket like a ghost of some forgotten war dot. Her fingers were blue. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She stared at the wreck of her ship in the distance, a dark shadow half buried in ice. Inside it, her friend still slept, forever frozen. A tear rolled down her cheek, freezing before it could fall. She whispered, "You said humans could live anywhere. You were right. I'm still here." Her voice was so quiet, the wind almost took it away. In the shadows of the dens, one small pair of glowing yellow eyes watched her. It was the young cub from before, Rin. He tilted his head, confused. The elders had told them that humans were weak, soft, creatures of warmth who could not stand the cold. But this one, she had survived the last storm. He remembered how, 3 nights ago, the wind had killed a wandering Thurkay hunter. But the human had lived. How? Curiosity burned brighter than his fear. He crawled out of his family's den, his paws sinking into the snow. The air stung his nose. He crept closer until he could see her clearly, the strange small being with no fur. Just fragile skin, shaking beneath her shiny blanket. Rin picked up a handful of snow and pressed it against his own arm. It hurt, just for a second. He wondered what it must be like to live with no fur at all. Mara's eyes fluttered open. She saw him. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, human and alien child, both bathed in pale blue light. Then slowly, Mara smiled. Not a wide smile, just a tiny one, weak but real. She whispered something softly. Rin didn't understand the words, but he understood the feeling. He ran back to his den, heart racing. That night, he couldn't sleep. The gift of a cub the next morning. The camp awoke to a strange sight. The human was alive. The aliens gathered, whispering to each other. She lived? Impossible. She had no heat. No pelts. No fire. Tharu stepped closer to her tent, his heavy boots crushing the snow. He looked down at her as she sat up, her face pale, eyes still bright. "You should be dead," he said. "I should," she answered. "But I'm not." He grunted, turned away, and muttered, "Humans. Too stubborn to die properly." The cubs laughed again, mocking her. One mimicked her shivering. Another held a piece of cloth, pretending it was her blanket. But Rin said nothing. His yellow eyes stayed on Mara as she gathered what little strength she had to stand. Later that night, when everyone slept, Rin left his den again. He looked back at his family. They were warm, curled under thick fur and firelight. Then he looked at Mara's tent, small and silent under the falling snow. He carried something in his arms, a small fur pelt, rough and uneven, from a creature his father had hunted long ago. It wasn't much, but it was warm. He crept quietly toward the tent. His claws clicked softly on the frozen ground. He dropped the pelt near the edge of her blanket, then ran back into the dark before she could see him. The morning discovery, when the first light touched the horizon. Mara stirred. Her body ached all over. She coughed, her throat dry. She reached for her blanket and froze. Something heavy and soft lay across her legs. She touched it. Fur. Real fur, warm. She blinked, confused, looking around. No one was there. She lifted the pelt to her chest and felt heat return to her fingers. Tears filled her eyes, not from pain, but from something deeper. "Thank you," she whispered to no one. For the first time in weeks. She slept without shaking. When the Thurkai came out of their dens, they saw her standing near the fire pit, holding the pelt around her shoulders. She looked different, not strong, not yet, but alive in a way that made them uneasy. Tharu frowned. Who gave that to her? No one answered. The cubs looked away, pretending not to know. But Rin smiled quietly, hiding behind his mother's leg. The whisper in the wind. That night, a new storm came. The sky roared. The wind tore at the tents. The temperature dropped again. The Thurkai huddled close to their fires. But outside, Mara worked. She gathered bits of metal from the crashed ship, tied them with rope, built a small shelter wall to block the wind. Her fingers bled, but she kept going. She managed to spark a fire from a broken circuit cell, a faint orange glow, small but alive. The aliens watched from their dens, murmuring in disbelief. "She makes fire without fuel," one said. "Humans are strange," said another. Mara sat by the fire, the pelt still wrapped around her shoulders, staring into the flames. She whispered to herself again. Words of comfort. Words of promise. Inside one of the dens, Rin whispered to his brother, "Do you think she will live again?" His brother snorted. "No, she's weak. Fire or not, she will freeze soon." But Rin wasn't so sure. The morning of respect, when dawn came again, the camp was silent. The storm had broken. Snow lay thick on everything. The sky glowed pale and pink. The aliens emerged one by one, brushing frost from their fur. And then they saw her, standing near the edge of the camp, her blanket and the fur cloak tight around her. Steam rising from the fire she had kept alive all night. Her hair was frozen with frost. Her lips cracked, but her eyes were steady. The cubs stopped laughing. Tharu approached, heavy and slow. He looked at the glowing fire, then at the human woman who refused to die. "Why do you fight the cold, little one?" he asked quietly. "Because," Mara said, "if I stop fighting, I stop being human." The alien commander stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away without another word. Behind him, Rin ran up to her, breathless, cheeks full of excitement. He pointed at the fire. "You make light from nothing," he said in his broken common tongue. "You warm." Mara smiled. "Yes," she said softly. "Warm." Rin's ears flicked, and for the first time, he smiled back. End of part 1. The first warm night that evening. As the stars came out over the frozen world, Mara sat near her small fire, the pelt tight around her shoulders. The cubs watched from a distance. They didn't mock this time. The wind whispered across the ice, carrying the faint sound of laughter. Not cruel laughter, but something new. Something almost kind. Mara closed her eyes, breathing the cold air, her heart steady. She didn't know it yet, but the simple act of surviving had already begun to change the way the Thurkai saw her kind. Tomorrow, more pelts would appear by her tent. And one by one, the cubs who once mocked her would begin to follow her light. They mocked her thin blanket, the story would say. But before the winter ended, the cubs would bring warmth of their own. The sun on Carthos never stayed long. It rose like a pale coin, rolled weakly across the frozen sky, and vanished again into gray clouds. The cold owned everything. Even sound seemed slower, softer, as if afraid to move too far from the fire. For several days after the storm, Mara Ellis kept to herself. She worked quietly, fixing her broken shelter, gathering pieces from the wrecked shuttle. The Thurkai watched from a distance, tall, furred, and proud, still unsure what to make of the small, hairless creature who refused to die. No one mocked her now. Not openly, but the whispers remained. "Humans are strange. She fights the snow like it insulted her. No one can live long with only a fire that small." Yet she did, every night. Her little flame burned through the storm. The cubs' curiosity among the watchers were the cubs, small, bright-eyed, and endlessly curious. They were not cruel by nature. They simply didn't understand. The youngest one, Rin, couldn't stop thinking about her. He remembered the night he had left his old fur pelt near her tent, the way she had smiled the next morning, like light breaking through snow. He hadn't told anyone, not even his mother. But he had felt proud. That evening, he crawled out of his den again. He wanted to see if she still had the pelt. From the shadows, he saw her sitting near her small fire, sewing patches into the silver blanket with thread made from broken wire. Her movements were slow, but careful. Her face was tired, but peaceful. Then something strange happened. She began to hum. It was soft at first, a low, gentle sound that didn't belong to this world. Rin had never heard a human song before. He crouched behind a snowdrift, listening as the melody rose and fell like warm wind in a cold place. The sound carried across the camp. The other cubs looked up, their ears twitching. One by one, they followed it, drawn like moths to a tiny, human flame. They gathered in a half circle, peeking from behind tents and rocks, their glowing eyes wide. Mara didn't notice them at first. When she finally looked up, she smiled instead of frowning. "You're not hiding very well," she said gently. The cubs froze. None of them moved or spoke. Mara reached into a small metal box beside her and pulled out a thin packet, a piece of dried food. She broke it and tossed half of it into the snow. "Hungry?" The cubs looked at each other. Rin stepped forward first, sniffing the air. The food smelled strange, salty, smoky, but not bad. He took it, ate quickly, and wagged his tail once before retreating. The other cubs followed. Soon they were sitting near her fire, chewing happily while pretending not to stare at her. For the first time, the outpost was quiet. No laughter, no insults, no anger. Just a human and a few alien cubs sharing warmth in the cold. The elders' disapproval. But not everyone was pleased. The next morning, the camp elders gathered around the largest fire. Their leader, Commander Tharu, growled lowly as he watched the cubs playing near Mara's tent. "They forget their place," he said. "She is not one of us." His second-in-command, Vran, nodded. "A human cannot survive here without our mercy. The cubs shame our kind by feeding her." Tharu's yellow eyes narrowed. "Then perhaps we test this mercy." He stood, towering over the fire, and roared, "Human, step forward." Mara looked up from her small campfire, blinking through the smoke. The entire camp turned to her. The cubs scattered behind tents, frightened. She rose slowly, brushing snow from her coat. Her hands trembled, but not from fear, from exhaustion. Tharu strode toward her, his shadow falling long and heavy across the ice. In his hand was a broken spear. Its shaft splintered, its tip cracked. "If you wish to live among warriors," he said, "then prove your strength. Bring back something that breathes. Bring it by sunset, or sleep forever beneath your thin blanket." Mara stared at the spear, then at the white plains beyond the camp. She didn't speak. She just nodded once, took the spear, and turned toward the frozen wilderness. Into the storm the sky darkened as she walked. Snow swirled like ghosts around her. The spear felt heavy in her hands, her boots sinking deep into the ice. Every breath burned her lungs. Every step echoed loneliness. She moved through the ruins of her crashed ship, the twisted metal, the broken glass, and whispered to herself, "Come on, Mara. Just one more step. Just one more." Far behind, hidden in the shadows of the camp wall, Rin followed. He couldn't let her go alone. Hours passed. The cold deepened. The wind howled louder than before. At last, she saw something. A flicker of movement near a ridge. She crouched low, gripping the spear. There, trapped in a sheet of ice, was a Thurkai cub, smaller than Rin, struggling weakly. Mara's eyes widened. She ran forward, breaking through snow and ice with her hands. The cub's fur was frozen stiff, its breath shallow. It whimpered, too cold even to cry. She dropped the spear, tore the thin blanket from her shoulders, and wrapped it around the cub. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're okay. Stay with me." The storm hit harder now, blinding her. The wind screamed, trying to tear the blanket from her hands. But she held on. With the cub in her arms, she stumbled through the blizzard, back toward the faint glow of the Thurkai fires. Returned to the camp by the time she reached the outpost. Her legs barely moved. Her face was white, her lips blue. The cub in her arms didn't move at all. The guards saw her first. They shouted, and soon the whole camp gathered. Tharu stepped forward, ready to mock her again, until he saw what she carried. His voice died in his throat. "That's my sister's son," one of the hunters gasped. "He vanished in the storm yesterday." Mara sank to her knees, still holding the cub close. "He's alive," she said weakly. "Just cold." Vran knelt beside her, pressing his hand to the cub's chest. A faint heartbeat pulsed beneath the fur. He looked up, eyes wide. "He breathes." Silence fell over the camp. Even the wind seemed to pause. Rin ran forward, tail wagging, eyes bright with relief. She found him. The human found him. No one spoke for a long time. Then Tharu stepped closer, towering above the small woman kneeling in the snow. He looked at her, the trembling hands, the frost-covered hair, the torn blanket, without a word. He pulled off the heavy cloak from his shoulders, thick, black fur lined with leather, and dropped it over her. "You returned with life," he said quietly. "No Thurkai has ever done that in such a storm." Mara blinked, shivering. "He needed help," she whispered. Tar single quotes. Rue nodded once. And you gave it. The cub's gift. That night, the camp changed. The cubs came to her fire again, but not to mock her this time. They came with gifts, small fur pelts, scraps of meat, dried berries. They dropped them near her tent and ran away laughing. Not cruelly now, but shyly, like children proud of their secret kindness. Even the elders watched with quiet respect. The strange human had done something none of them expected, not only survived, but saved. Mara sat by her fire, the cloak wrapped around her, the rescued cub sleeping beside her in a nest of furs. The air smelled of snow and smoke. She looked up at the alien stars, brighter now, sharp as silver knives, and whispered, "Maybe I was never meant to die here after all." From the shadows, Rin's voice answered softly, "No die, live, strong." Mara turned and smiled at him. "Strong?" He nodded, grinning, baring small white teeth. "Fireheart." She laughed quietly. "Fireheart. I like that." The whisper of respect. When morning came, the cub she had saved opened his eyes. His mother cried out with joy, pressing her forehead to Mara's hand. She didn't speak human, but her tears said everything. Tharu approached again. The firelight reflected in his yellow eyes. He looked at the human woman and said, "Your kind is soft, yet you stand against the cold. We mocked you for your thin blanket. Now we see your heart burns hotter than ours." Mara didn't know how to reply. She only nodded and smiled faintly. That evening, the cubs danced around her fire, playing and laughing. Rin placed another pelt near her feet, white as snow, clean and soft. "For warm sleep," he said proudly. Mara reached down and ruffled his fur. "Thank you, Rin." The elder warriors watched from afar. They didn't laugh anymore. End of Part 2. The storm's silence. As night fell over Carthos, the camp grew quiet. The sky turned deep violet, and the stars burned like cold fire. Mara lay under the heavy cloak, surrounded by warmth, not just from the furs, but from something deeper. She had crossed a line she didn't even know existed, from tolerated outsider to something almost sacred. In the wind, the snow whispered her name again. But this time, it wasn't mockery. It was awe. "The human who walks through storms," they whispered. "The one who brings warmth where even fire dies." And far beyond the hills, unseen in the dark, a new shadow stirred. Something vast, moving through the frozen plains. The peace would not last. The winter storms on Carthos had grown silent. For days the snow fell softly instead of screaming. The sky was pale, and for the first time, sunlight reached the frozen plain within the Thurkai camp. Life had changed. Where once they mocked the human, now they greeted her with quiet respect. The cubs who used to laugh at her thin blanket now sat near her fire, listening to her stories about Earth, a place with trees that bent in the wind, rivers that sang, and air that didn't bite the skin. They didn't understand everything she said, but they understood her warmth. And so, among the coldest beings on the coldest world, Mara Ellis became something new, a bridge between fire and frost. The camp's transformation commander Tharu often stood watching her from a distance. His golden eyes, once filled with disdain, now held something like thought. He saw how the cubs followed her, how the weak and wounded came near her tent to share the fire, how she spoke gently even when she was tired, how she smiled even when her hands bled from work. The humans, he thought, were strange creatures indeed, too fragile to fight the cold, too stubborn to surrender to it. Each night, the campfires burned brighter, not because of the blue alien flame, but because of the small orange glow she had built. The one she had carried from her ship's wreck. It was her fire that spread, her will that warmed the camp. But peace never lasts long on Carthos, and neither does warmth. The warning it began at dusk when the sky turned red. The wind carried a strange smell, something sharp and wet. The fur on Tharu's neck rose instantly. "The ice maw," he growled. "It comes from the north." The name alone froze the cubs where they stood. Even the warriors fell silent. The ice maw was not a legend. It was real, a creature born from the deep glaciers, massive and ancient, with claws like iron and breath that froze everything it touched. It hunted sound, heat, and life. The last time it came, it had destroyed 3 outposts. Tharu turned to his hunters. "Form the lines. Guard the cubs. Stay behind the stones." Mara watched them prepare, confusion on her face. "What is it?" she asked. No one answered. But when she saw fear in their eyes, real fear, she knew it was something worse than any storm. She grabbed her broken spear, the same one she had carried into the snow weeks ago, and followed them to the ridge. The arrival of the beast, the first sound was a low rumble, like thunder buried deep under ice. Then the ground began to shake. Through the white mist, something massive moved, a shape of muscle and frost, crawling on 6 legs. Its body was covered in shards of frozen bone. Its mouth opened wider than its head, lined with teeth that glowed blue. The ice maw had come. The Thurkai roared and raised their weapons. But even their courage faltered as the beast's shadow fell across the camp. Tharu stepped forward, spear in hand. "Hold the line," he shouted. The beast screamed, a sound like metal tearing, and charged. The first warrior flew through the air, broken. The second was crushed under a claw the size of a cart. Fire arrows hissed uselessly against its frozen hide. Mara stood frozen, watching as chaos tore through the camp. Cubs screamed. Warriors fell. The fires went out, and in the middle of the storm, she saw Rin, the little cub, trapped under a collapsed tent, calling for help. The humans fire without thinking. Mara ran. Snow exploded around her as the ice maw swung its claws, smashing tents and walls. Tharu shouted her name, but she didn't stop. She crawled under the broken beams, grabbed Rin's arm, and pulled him free. "Run!" she shouted. The cub tried, but his leg was bleeding. The monster turned toward the sound of her voice. Its icy breath filled the air, freezing the ground at her feet. Mara pushed Rin behind her and stood up, her small frame trembling but unmoving. She lifted the cracked spear. "Come on," she whispered. "I've had colder mornings." The beast lunged. She threw herself to the side, slamming the spear into one of its eyes. The shaft snapped in half, but the creature screamed in pain. She fell into the snow, gasping, as the ice maw reared back. Furious, Tharu and his warriors charged again, attacking from behind, buying her seconds. But the creature's tail smashed them aside like leaves. Mara saw the fire pit nearby, her small orange fire, dying in the snow. An idea struck her like lightning. She grabbed a metal canister from the ground, one of her ship's old fuel cells. She tore it open, spilling the blue chemical fluid onto the snow. Then she took a piece of burning cloth from the pit and whispered, "For warmth." And for fire. She threw it. The explosion ripped through the blizzard. Flames roared high, brighter than any sun Carthos had seen. The ice maw screamed, its icy shell cracking, melting. But Mara was caught in the blast too. The fire knocked her to the ground. She hit the snow hard, coughing, her coat smoldering. Rin crawled to her, crying, "Fireheart, wake!" Her eyes fluttered open. She smiled weakly. "Told you. Fire doesn't fear the cold." The turning point, the creature stumbled, burning, roaring. The warriors seized the moment. Tharu led the charge, driving his massive spear into the beast's chest. "For the human!" he roared. Together they brought the monster down. It fell with a thunderous crash, shaking the earth. The air filled with steam as the fire melted the ice. When the silence finally came, the only sound left was the wind, warm. For the first time in memory, the human's last fire, Tharu found Mara lying in the snow. Half conscious, her body covered in frost and burns. She was breathing, but barely. He knelt beside her, pulling her into his arms. "You are mad, human," he said softly. "Mad and brave." She smiled faintly. "That's humanity's secret." Rin pressed his small paw against her hand. "You saved us," he whispered. "You burned the cold." The warriors gathered around her, their heavy shadows falling across the snow. One by one, they removed their cloaks, thick, fur-lined, and laid them over her. Not out of pity. Out of honor. Soon, she was buried under a mountain of furs, and for the first time in her life on Carthos, she was truly warmed. The dawn after, when dawn came, the camp was quiet. Smoke rose from the remains of the battle. The ice maw lay frozen again, a statue of cracked ice and flame. Mara awoke slowly. Her body hurt, but she was alive. Around her, the cubs slept close, curled like a pile of fur and warmth. Rin snored softly against her arm. Tharu stood at the edge of the fire pit, watching the sunrise. When she sat up, he turned to her. "We have hunted the ice maw for generations," he said. "But none of us could kill it. Only you." "Not kill," she said quietly. "Just melt." He chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound. Then, to everyone's surprise, the great commander knelt. "From this day," he said, "you are no longer the human. You are Fireheart of the Thurkai." The entire camp bowed their heads. Even the elders bent their knees. Mara's eyes filled with tears. She looked around at the faces, not monsters, not beasts, but family. She reached for Rin and pulled him close. "Thank you," she whispered, "for teaching me that warmth doesn't come from fire. It comes from hearts." The legend weeks passed. The snowstorms returned, but they no longer felt the same. The camp had changed forever. When strangers came through the frozen lands, they heard whispers, stories told by firelight. They mocked the human for her thin blanket, the storytellers said. But she gave us something far greater than warmth. She gave us courage. Children grew up hearing her name. Warriors spoke it with pride. And in the heart of the frozen world, a single orange fire still burned, the flame she had lit. The one no wind could kill. The fire heart of Carthos became legend. Final line, closing for narration. They mocked her thin blanket, the old warriors tell their cubs. But now we wear her courage as our own.